Well, you need to take care of yourself before you can take care of others. Well, you need to do this and practice and make sure you say no. We know these things, but yet we're not able to execute them because of what's happening internally, right? Our drivers, our critics, our internal pleasers, our protectors, all of these parts of us that, again, logically, we know we need to do, but yet we're still pulled with, maybe I'll check my email once more. If I don't turn this in now, my teammates might think I'm a slacker. If I do this, then so-and-so is going to get ahead. There's this drive, all these things happening internally that, again, logically, we understand that we need to pause and take breaks and utilize self-care tactics, but we're not doing them because of our internal drivers and protectors, which I will go into a little bit more. Okay? So we think about these Band-Aids, we think about distractions, we think about, again, all the natural transitions that we have in a day, whether you're walking from a physical location to another, you're getting ready for something, you're switching roles. Oftentimes, we clutter these with distractions. We're checking to see if someone messaged us. We're checking to see if there's something new on our social media feed. We're checking this, we're doing that. We are so scattered or cluttered that oftentimes we forget these opportunities, which we have several, for natural resets. Okay? All right. And so when we think about just mental health in general, this I thought was so interesting. I wanted to just share a few stats. 80%, 81% comfortable. It talks about close relationships at work, which I know as HR professionals, if I had to take a guess, you like people, at least for the most part. Yeah? Yeah? You like people. Probably have higher levels of empathy and compassion for the most part, right? Yes, this kind of steered you into a field where, again, it has human in the title, right? So again, we need people, we need each other, we need relationships, we need connections, and we have a lot of different outlets for that. But it's great that this gives us a little bit of hope. We know these things again, but we need to utilize them, and a lot of us are out of shape when it comes to, God forbid, small talk, and all the times that we do have to connect. And this is so important, I think, for you all to know, just because as HR professionals, I will say you had a hefty load, you always have. But I worked with a lot of HR departments and professionals, especially during the pandemic and after, because so much is already thrown into your laps organizationally to fix and solve and soothe and all the things. But I think even with that, there was a lot of things that were intimate in nature, emotionally in nature, that were just thrown into your laps. And a lot of times, I know because of your high levels of compassion, empathy, and that need to serve, you placed yourself in roles that was very taxing, not only to emotionally regulate yourself, but to feel that you had this need to emotionally regulate and help others, right? And so this is very important, I think, to key us off or to start us off with in HR. Work dread fatigue. I like to call it compassion fatigue, right? There's, again, this drive. I have an open door policy. Come see me, but yet I'm drowning a bit. And I want to help, and I want to serve, and I want to do this, and all these different things falling into my lap. And you can see these stats too. 90% overwhelmed, 84% stressed, right? And this is, again, kind of a snapshot after kind of 2022 of when we moved and kind of transitioned out of the pandemic. And so again, very important to just kind of go over some of the stats a bit. So when we talk about compassion fatigue, when we talk about the empathy effect, a lot of times we're talking about the roles that we find ourselves in relationships or put ourselves in relationships, professionally and personally. And I talked a little bit in the beginning, just mentioned inner critic, inner pleaser, and let's not forget our beloved ego, right? I myself, having perfectionistic tendencies, have a fierce inner critic. She's with me a lot. She was with me this morning. She woke up with me, and as I was coming here, about to get on stage, she's blazing. She has all these doubts and is trying to protect me from fear, embarrassment, being unprepared, all the things. So my critic, I'm sure many of you can relate in different ways, she said, what if you pick the wrong dress to wear? What if you're not prepared enough? What if you get a question that you don't know how to answer? What if nobody comes to your session? What if millions of people come to your session? All the things, right? And this is a means to protect me, but she comes in way too strong often. She came in way too strong when I was an athlete. I would play tight. I wasn't able to access the parts of me that were loose and confident and able to be in the present moment. And I would try very hard to shove her down. I don't need you. I try all the tactics, even as a speaker years ago. I'd breathe, I'd visualize, I'd listen to music, I'd do all the things just as I did as an athlete, trying to cancel her out. When in reality, I learned I needed to align with her. I needed to soothe her. I needed to appreciate her. And so my self-talk has shifted a bit, where even this morning, she was there, giving me 10 bodyguards when I needed one, thinking this was life or death. And I had to remind her, I signed up for this. I want to do this. I'm nervous the first few minutes, and then I get a little better, right? I connect. I enjoy educating people. I enjoy speaking about mental health. And this is something we like to do. This is a mission that we have. So if you could just move over just a little bit, I don't want you to leave. I need you. But if you could let the other parts of me surface, I'd really appreciate it. And that has taken reps, that has taken a different reframe, but think about your critics. Think about the pleasers within you, trying to say, well, I'll just accommodate, I'll just do that. Well, I'll do that for you. Well, let me do that. If any of you in school, when we did group projects, if you went to traditional schooling, you remember the dreaded group projects, where there was always that one kid that would kind of hang in the background like, I'm not doing anything. And there was one kid, maybe it was you, where you take charge. Okay, this is what we're doing. This will be great. And everyone does this, and you ended up doing the whole thing. Right? Your pleaser was fierce. You didn't want to let the teacher down. You wanted to get that A. And you wanted to rid yourself of the anxious thoughts that would keep you up at night. And so thinking about these parts of us that we generally coin as anxiety, anxious thoughts, we generally coin as things that we don't like about ourselves. Oh, why am I always so critical? The imposter syndrome, all the things. We generally try to get rid of these things. We try to squash them down. We don't like these parts of ourselves, but we all have them, and they serve a purpose. And setting these boundaries with ourselves and being purposeful about what roles we fill, why we're communicating, the information that we're giving each other, whether it's our colleagues or our families, what is our sole purpose? Is our ego leading the show? Is our critic involved? Is our pleaser? But understanding these motives when it comes to our self-care, understanding that this tends to get in the way when we're trying to set a boundary, the guilt involved with saying no, is golden. It's not just reminding yourself, well, I should set that boundary, or I should say no, or I need to take care of myself even though I'm really not. Thinking about what you can control, thinking about aligning with those parts of you that were probably modeled for you when you were this big, and gaining that knowledge so that you can collect that data and move forward professionally and personally. Okay? All right. So boundaries. As a clinician, I love that this word has been circulating the last several years. It's wonderful. Boundaries, though, are things, basically barriers, things that we have set as humans based on our data, based on things, unfortunately, traumas, things that we've endured, or even just uncomfortable situations that we've had that let us know this is not okay. And we tend to let other people know that. Just so you know, people that tend to have high levels of compassion and empathy, which I'm assuming there's quite a few of you in this room, tend to not be great at boundary setting. We speak it, we talk the talk, but we can't really walk the walk because our pleasers are front and center, right? Well, I don't want to make them feel anything uncomfortable. Well, if I do that, then people might think that I'm not a team player. Well, if I do that, someone might be mad at me. Well, if I do that, then maybe I'm not a good person, right? And so we accommodate. We're 10 steps ahead, and we exhaust ourselves. And we don't give ourselves the opportunity to recover, reset, collect our data, and pause, right? And so a lot of times I work with a lot of clients who come in with anxiety issues, right? And if you think about, just visualize with me real quick, little suppression bubbles, these little bubbles that a lot of times And don't get me wrong, there's a time and a place for us to comfortably feel certain emotions, right? Even right now, if some of you are feeling highly anxious, you've identified like, this is probably not the time or the place to have a tantrum. If I need to, I might just go to the bathroom or do something for myself. But we've learned that we need to keep some things suppressed, right? We've learned that there's a time and a place. But oftentimes we don't circle back. We create these little suppression bubbles, or if it's a better visual for you, think of a balloon, and we're walking around with this full balloon. Air is coming in, gradually, could be little things. Maybe they didn't have what you wanted for breakfast. Maybe the coffee wasn't quite as hot. Just a little bit of air. Maybe you exchanged a smile with someone, and a little bit of air came out. We're kind of all throughout the day getting our balloon, filling it with air, filling it without air. But a lot of us are walking around with a full balloon most of the day, and that's really challenging. I can remember early in my career, I worked at a high school in Indianapolis, and I was the school therapist, if you will, and I had one client, and I think he was a junior, and he's what you'd call like a gentle giant, right? Probably had 3 inches on me, big kid, football player, but just a big teddy bear kid, right? Wouldn't hurt a fly. And I can remember standing in the hallway during passing period, which in any high school, it's mayhem, right? And I'm standing there, and I'm watching the kids, go by, and it's crowded. And I see him up ahead, and we kind of make eye contact, and I'm watching him. He stands out. And another kid was running through the hallway and, kind of pinballing his way through and nudged into my kid, right? Didn't knock him over. He had a lot going on there, but nudged into him. And my client turned and just wailed him, like just flattened him. I was shocked, and I think everyone else was shocked. And he immediately saw my eyes, and I was like, and he ran into my office. The kid was okay. I stood up, and I don't know how. But he immediately started crying, just bursting into tears. And I said, "What happened?" And he goes, "Miss Leah, I think my balloon popped." I said, "I think you're right." And his pop came out in that way. But if that situation had happened, I guarantee it, if that had happened 2 weeks ago, he probably would have been like, "It's all right, man," right? Think of us in traffic. Some days we're like, "Yeah, come on in." Other days we're like, right? It depends on how full our balloon is, right? And so this kid, he had a difficult situation, and I had, after talking with him, he had said, "My dad left again last night. And, I was up all night, and my mom was crying." So, air. And so when we think about things that happen to us, as they will, hardships, just difficult days, what's happening here, and the false narrative sometimes that we tell ourselves, our air fills up. And so the importance of self-care, it could be bubble baths and walks and getting your nails done. Great. Just be there with it. I have several people that are like, "Oh, I just love my Netflix shows." Amazing. But they're also playing Candy Crush and eating and FaceTiming someone and petting their dog at the same time. It's like being on a treadmill and eating chocolate cake. What are we doing? We're missing, and we're not gaining the perks of sometimes the efforts that we are making. But even just right now, engaging, whether your thoughts are elsewhere and you're bringing them back, you're clearing some of that clutter, you're practicing being present, you're getting better in shape with that. A lot of us are out of shape. Okay. So again, I've talked a little bit about these things, but false ownership, that's when, again, we are creating these narratives sometimes, okay? And we're thinking about, what is my role in this situation? And a lot of times, it's not necessarily ours. We're putting ourselves in the middle of something. We're setting ourselves up in a role where we are going to get and absorb a lot of the emotion that tends to overshadow our own. Hence, as a therapist, a lot of times people that go into this field are like, "I want to help. I want to serve. I want to create space for people, just as you all do." But a lot of times, if we are not in line with what's happening with us, not a good recipe. And that's with any profession. But thinking about how serving others sometimes, taking and absorbing other people's dilemmas and hurdles and emotions is sometimes easier than dealing with our own. And we walk through life looking for these external structures, again, rather than giving ourselves our own courtesy. Okay? And so one thing, too, is self-trust. That's a huge thing when it comes to setting intrinsic boundaries. That's a huge thing, I think, with soothing our inner parts. And again, there's so much talk, too, which I love about taking risks. There's so much talk about just showing up to things. And when we do these things, when we get our reps in this way, we are building trust. We're soothing those protectors within us. We're soothing those parts of us that are like, I don't know, this could lead to embarrassment, this could lead to shame, this could lead to all the things. We're building this self-trust when we acknowledge that I survived that. I did okay. And people are not thinking about me as much as I think they are, because guess what? They're thinking about themselves. Yeah? When I was in 8th grade, which we all know middle school is a challenging time. When I was in 8th grade, my grandmother was visiting, and she was in the kitchen with my mother as I got home from school. And I walked in, and they asked, how was your day? I said, fine, but there were these girls in the hall, and I know they were talking about me. And it kind of ruined my day. And I was thinking about it all day, and I was wondering if I wore the wrong thing, or what I said, or what I did. I mean, my whole day was occupied with false narratives and just internalizing. And my grandmother said, well, how do you know they were talking about you? I said, well, they were down the hall, and they were in a group, and they kept looking at me, and then they'd talk, and then they'd look at me, and she goes, well, you weren't in the conversation. I said, no, but I know they were talking about me. And she goes, well, Leah, what people say about you when you're not involved in the conversation is none of your business. And I looked at my mom like, she's old. And my mom did not take the bait and have a moment of, bonding over that. She kind of was like, and my grandma said it again. And as you can see, it stuck. I didn't really get it till I was probably in my mid-20s. But she said, what people say about you is none of your business. And that has, again, stuck and relieved me, not every time, the mind is strong, but relieved me of so much energy and so much time filtrating things through my ego, thinking about, I wonder what people are thinking about me. I wonder if people think this. I wonder if people this. And not fact-checking myself. Not reminding myself that if someone has a problem or something they need to share with me, that's also their responsibility. I need to do my due diligence of checking in if I feel like I may have done something or misstepped, but that's not all mine. And we carry these loads around. And you can see how that fights for space when we want to show up to something authentically and be present. Right? So taking this false ownership, and the reason I say all this, and I know it's a little clinical in nature, but it's so important because this is the root of what prevents us from setting these boundaries. This is the root of what we take to work. This is the root of when we're in a meeting with someone and we walk away feeling like, oh God, I don't know, she probably feels this way about me, or I feel this way about me. And understanding where these insecurities or where these, internalization or false ownership might in fact be coming from. This is the work that we need to do, not only for our professions, but for our personal relationships as well. It gets in the way. Okay? All right, and internalization, again, is when we are making something and making it about us. Well, so-and-so probably feels this because I did this. Maybe, but we can check in. But a lot of times we're doing this way too much. And again, this is a very common trait with people with high levels of compassion and empathy. But identifying what your true role is, that's a wonderful question. What can I control? What are my options? What's my role? And what can I let go of? And not being in this frenzy and urgency cycle of just kind of creating structure sometimes when it's not even ours. When I was in grad school decades ago, I frantically busted into one of my professor's offices. We probably had a paper due the next day that I had barely started, if we're being honest. And came in, and he's working on something. And I said, hi, I have a few questions about the assignment. I'm sure I was very frantic, urgent, kind of my critic was front and center. And he looked up calmly. I can remember this. He looked up and he said, hi, Leah. I can tell what you have to say is really important, but I need to finish this, and I'm not going to be able to give you my full attention. And so let's find a time later this afternoon where I can be all yours and we can discuss what you'd like to discuss. And that was a boundary, my friends, and one that made me still feel very respected. But he very well could have multitasked that. And we've all done this, unfortunately. We've been on the receiving end, and we've done it. He could have kept working and said, oh, you're good. I'm sure you're fine. Yeah, you turned in the last paper, right? Oh, yeah, all good. Yeah, good. We'll see you tomorrow. And I would have left him and like, right? So it was really that right there when we think about as leaders and as colleagues and kind of having this open door policy. That's a lot. I get the essence behind that. But I know, too, that many of you are probably sitting here being like, I want to help, and sometimes things are on fire, and sometimes things are urgent, but not everything. And it's so interesting how when we can set those boundaries, what we're modeling culturally, and that we're trying to focus on one task, if we have the privilege to in that moment, even with our children, even with our families, and giving each other the proper attention, but waiting till we are ready and resourceful and our balloon is empty enough to be able to do it. Because otherwise, we're just running around as a basket case, as a stress case. So modeling this as HR professionals and being, kind of present, but allowing ourselves and giving ourselves the grace if we have so many things happening, and being candid and vulnerable. When we talk about vulnerability as a leader, it's not sharing your life secrets. It's about sharing, today is a very hectic day, and I really know what you have to say is important, or let's circle back later. And I'll tell you, the circle back, or even giving people a little bit of space, you'll quickly identify these micro codependencies that have been created in the workplace. If you are that person that was in the group project that's doing all of it. I've worked with several HR professionals that are like, I accommodate, I just take on work, or I say, oh, I'll take care of that for you, instead of allowing people to get their own reps in, okay? And that moves us to the meat of the talk, okay? This is something that I've had to remind myself as a clinician, is, Leah, your role is to be a space creator. Your role is to support, not solve. As with you, professionally and personally, as humans, we want to use our empathy, we want to use our compassion, but we also don't need to insert ourselves front and center and take ownership of things, okay? So when we think about supporting people and not solving for people, we are preventing these micro codependencies. We're also helping setting intrinsic boundaries and boundaries externally, which is going to drastically impact our ability to emotionally regulate and take care of our stress. Make sense? Okay. And so when we think about, I'm just going to briefly go over these steps here. Validation. You've all heard that word. But it's so interesting in therapy when I mention the word validation, especially when I do couples work, which I don't do a lot of because it's exhausting. Validation does not necessarily mean agreeing. We forget that. People could be saying something and you could be thinking, I don't agree with anything that he's saying. But the point of validation is that you're making an effort to understand the words, the message, the nonverbals, right? That's the goal of validation. And when we enter a conversation, and I'm talking about a conversation that has interwoven emotion in it. These are not concrete discussions or exchanges when someone comes up to you and said, hey, where's the copier? And you're like, well, let me see if I can support you with that. No. That you just say the copier's to the left, right? These are more emotionally based conversations where there's a decision to be made, okay? So validation is key. A lot of us are so quick to give advice or put the pressure on ourselves that we need to know the answers and give advice. Don't get me wrong. Everyone in this room has probably given some magical advice. And it's easy for us sometimes to hear the dilemmas, the hurdles, the struggles from other people and think, I know exactly what this person should do. But how many times do they actually do it? Not very often, right? If any of you are parents, you know what I'm talking about. But people need to get their own reps in. People are in different places. We have had different paths, different upbringings, different experiences, different values. And so again, creating the space and validating first of like, oh, yeah, that sounds like a lot. Or paraphrasing. Oh, so you walked in there and then you did this. And yeah, You're paraphrasing, you're showing this person, I'm creating space for you, I'm here as a collaborator, I'm not going to solve. I'm not going to give that direct advice, I'm not going to take false ownership. This is yours, and it's really hard, but I'm going to be here as a supporter. And so that validation is key. Empathize, which I think a lot of us probably do, hopefully naturally. But again, that's that, no, that sounds like a very tricky situation, or I'm so sorry. Even our nonverbals, so you're talking to someone and you can see empathy, where they're trying hard or they can relate. It's so fascinating, though, how a lot of us, and this is not a malicious thing, but a lot of us, when we're sharing something, the person that we're sharing it with, their brain immediately starts to sift through and be like, I've experienced that, or my neighbor experienced that, or this is what I did, and we too quickly oftentimes relate. Right? Oh, well, when that happened to me, this is what I did. Or yeah, you know what? I had a colleague that da-da-da-da. We switch the momentum, we switch the whole dynamic of the conversation. And so refraining, that's normally a means to relate, to build connection, but we're doing it prematurely, right? And so thinking about that. I had a friend in high school that, I'd known since I was, in kindergarten. And we'd known each other for years. And I remember it was probably my senior year of high school. And we were all talking. And she had asked me, like, how's your boyfriend? And I started to talk to her about it. And then she kind of switched it. And she started talking about hers, which I actually enjoyed. I like to be in the listener role, hence therapist. But she said, Leah, I've known you for years. And you know what? I really feel like I don't know you. And I said, and at first, I'm critical. I'm like, oh my God, am I not open? Am I closed? Am I really, and I'm going through all the things that I am and my deficits. And I took that feedback and I just kind of was like, as my 17-year-old self, I was like, interesting. So I did some self-reflecting. But then I started to notice in conversations, even throughout my 20s and 30s, that a lot of times I would switch back. Maybe naturally I would do this, or just in the flow of the conversation, I would switch back to the listener role. And a lot of times when I would share something, whoever I was listening to me would get so excited and then share something that they could relate to, which again is conversation, is fine, but it's an interesting thing when you think about the dynamics and how that switches the space. And so when we empathize, it's not necessarily immediately relating, it's sticking with that space, right? Yeah. And inquire. This is when we ask these questions. Right? What are your options? And you add your own flavor to this. But what are your options? What can you control? What do you feel like next steps are? All of those things that are generating these processing skills, that are allowing them to get their reps in. Again, you may know exactly what needs to happen. But a lot of us were not raised in families where we had a lot of reps with that. A lot of us were not raised in families where we were modeled how to handle our stress in a healthy way, or to gain processing skills, right? And so as adults, sometimes we're scrambling to get these in. And I think as HR professionals, as friends, as colleagues, as parents, as partners, allowing people to get these things in and keeping ownership of what they're going through is essential, not only for them, but for us and our tanks and our balloons, okay? And so then we motivate, and this is not all just in sequence, but if we motivate, this is again when we're pulling out strengths. We're looking from strengths-based perspective, right? This is when we're not adding all the fluff of like, you can do it, or just, don't worry about it. But this is when we're actually there with the person and kind of pulling out things that they typically do well, or maybe soothing that as you cycle through some of these questions, I think you're going to figure it out, or let me know how this is going. Right? That motivator, keeping the ownership with them. And then reconnect. This is the circle back. This is when we get that text from a friend. This is when we circle back with a colleague of like, how did that meeting go? How are you doing? And checking in. This again, we all want a culture. We all want a culture that is connected, that's authentic. But we're all burnt out and we're running around with full balloons. And this tactic too, again, cannot only be used professionally, but personally. If I think about my children, I know one thing that I do say to them in one form or another is, what are your options? And I get an eye roll sometimes. But I'm allowing them to get their reps in. I don't execute it perfectly all the time. Sometimes they come home and I'm like, well, my first instinct is, well, I'll email your teacher. Well, I'll do this. Well, I'll do that. I'm canceling out the opportunity for them to get some of their resilience, for them to get some time to soothe those parts of them that are unsure, that are anxious, that are critical. And so as parents, we do this, but as leaders, we do this as well. And building that resilience within our cultures and creating authentic spaces and not multitasking with people. Okay? All right, so again, we validate, we paraphrase, avoid giving step-by-step advice unless it's very concrete and tangible, right? Checking in. This doesn't mean that you can't give scenarios. It doesn't mean to be said, what would happen if you did this? You're still allowing that person to have ownership of what they're going through, and you're not going to walk away feeling exhausted, okay? All right, motivating and encouraging independence, okay? It's creating and also, not creating, excuse me, those times when you feel like, God, I have to have this person's under my wing or this, or every time there's an issue, they come flying to me. This is a good indicator that this person needs to build their own confidence and resilience, and the only way to do that is through reps. All right, so these are those questions, some of those questions, and again, you'd add your own flavor to this. But this is something, too, that is amazing to ask yourself. I know for me, again, recovering perfectionist, anxious tendencies, highly emotional. Sometimes we can spiral. We find ourselves in the same sequence or ruminating, These questions, again, what can I control? What is mine? Sometimes it might not be nothing. It might be very minor. What are my options? Going through all of them, even if they sound silly, you are moving yourself into a more strategic part of your brain, and everything else has to shift over. Okay? What can I let go of, surrender to? What have I tried in the past? What would it look like if? What risk can I take? These are fantastic questions to, again, add your own flavor to when working with people professionally, personally, and for yourself. Okay? And kind of building that self-connection. All right. How am I doing on time? Okay? Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. And so I want to do this. Of course, this is maybe hard for a lot of you to see. I do have this on the handout if you want to download later. But this is the good old feelings wheel. Okay, this is going to be the gushy part. And as a therapist, I have to throw this in at the end. But I would love all of you, if you have eagle eyes and you can see this, fantastic. But let's take an opportunity to just have a quick check-in, okay? Check in. You might be a person who likes the 1 to 10 scale, 1 being like, I can't believe I made it here. This is actually a really difficult day. 10 being like, this is the best day ever. Where you fall on that scale right now, currently. And even just reflecting and thinking where you fell on that scale when you woke up this morning. Your numbers are probably a bit different, maybe even after you had your coffee, right? This feelings wheel is also a wonderful tool to use for just check-in. Not judgment, not over-analyzing, right? I have a lot of clients now that I work with that have this as their screensaver, which I thought was very cool. And they use this as a moment to just, where am I at? It could be 3 or 4 different feelings, and some of them might be almost contradicting each other, but the brain is capable of that. The mind is capable of that. And feelings, as we know, are fluid, and sometimes we may feel something that's really uncomfortable, and it kind of naturally works its way out. Sometimes it's lingering, it's creating these suppression bubbles, and we have to clear out our clutter. Otherwise, our body and mind lose that trust in our abilities to do that, right? And they clear it out on their own. And this can come in a balloon pop. This can come in a panic attack. This can come at 2 a.m. when you're thinking about things that you're like, why am I thinking about this? I so need to go to sleep, right? And that's your brain and your body's way of saying, like, all right, well, we can't rely on her. We're going to do this ourselves. We're going to take matters into our own hands. And not that our bodies and minds are not on our team, because they are on our team. But doing that due diligence of clearing our clutter and acknowledging, wow, I've checked in with myself when I brush my teeth or when I'm in the shower, which are 2, hopefully, things you're doing on a regular basis. And I've discovered that I'm feeling a similar thing that's very uncomfortable or that I don't want to feel. This isn't, again, a time to put a Band-Aid on it or use something to just shove it down. This is a time to think through it, which, again, is a lot of work. And it's uncomfortable work, but essential work if we want to show up the way that I know you all do professionally and personally. Okay? So these check-ins too, again, it can come in this form, it can come in just how's my body feeling. I know when I work with a lot of athletes too, it's again that basic essential task of like tapping into your 5 senses. Even now, if you're experiencing some angst, just focus on what do I see? What color shirts are people wearing? How's the temperature in this room? Hot. How is, what am I hearing? How does my body feel? What do I smell? Hopefully something okay, right? So checking in with our 5 senses, it moves us into a different part of our brain. It makes those anxious thoughts, those critical thoughts, those things, because anxiety and all those thoughts are very future-based, anticipating, right? Or they're past-based, rehashing things that we may not have any control over right now. And so bringing yourself back to the present is amazing and does wonders for calming those parts of our brain. So these check-ins, again, we think of one more thing we have to do for self-care. I don't have the time, I already have a full plate. Well, again, think and notice about all your transitions that you have throughout the day. The physical ones from one place to another, the just pauses you have when you are brushing your teeth, when you're making all these things that you're transitioning from and doing. These are moments that are being sabotaged by stimulation, oftentimes with our devices. But thinking about times, all of these opportunities to just notice where you are. How am I feeling? What am I doing? How's my body feel? What do I notice? I trained myself, and again, I'm not executing it perfectly, that's not the goal, but when I stop at red lights now, I used to pull out my phone, who messaged me, are there any updates that have happened in the last 10 seconds, all that. We condition ourselves for that, and I had to recondition myself to use that as an opportunity to almost adopt the mind of a toddler. Look out the window. Look, there's a red truck. That cloud looks like a dinosaur. All the things, right? And what that does is I may be at the same intersection 50 times a week, but I'm going to always see something different, right? Rather than messing with this and changing my podcast and doing all the things. Sometimes I'm at a red light for 10 seconds. Sometimes I'm there for a minute. But what an opportunity to just check in and just notice and access and soothe and clear some of that clutter. It's almost like I have a whiteboard behind me and all of that stuff just gets wiped clean. Now, crap might be filling right back up very frequently or real quickly, but it gives you that clean swipe, right? So using these times throughout the day to focus on that is amazing. It builds resilience, it builds self-trust. We're setting these boundaries with ourselves, right? And so the next time you go on that vacation, the next time you have that, I'm taking this Friday off, we get so excited for that and we check all of our boxes and we do all the things and guess what? We show up to that vacation or we show up to that day off or we show up somewhere and we can't access the parts of us that have been dormant, the parts of us that are fun, the parts of us that can laugh and play and maybe be calm and present. We're out of shape. And we have this expectation that we're going to lay on the beach and we're going to be like, this is lovely and I can do all the things. But sometimes we're more anxious. We have a hangover, an anxiety hangover, right? Yeah. And this is not a critical thing where you're like, oh my God, that's me. What's wrong with me? Oh my gosh, I have work to do. No. This is data. This is data that we use to let us know, like, we're out of shape. It's almost like if everyone in this room, you hadn't ran for 10 years and you all said, we want to run a marathon next week. I'd be like, great, okay, well that's, okay. Who am I to, say you can't? But that might be something that you want to train for a bit. Get your body, build that trust with your body, get in shape, get some reps in, so that you're ready and you can truly enjoy that marathon, if that's a possibility. Right? Same thing up here. Right? We got to get in better shape with these things. We have to get more reps in when it comes to these things. And like I said, you can integrate this into any routine. And if you start to take these opportunities, some of you may experience a surge of anxiety at first. Because guess what? You're recalibrating, and anxiety is like, whoa, we run the show here. Or your critic's like, whoa, we run the show here. And you're soothing in the process. That is normal. Just like, again, if you go work out for the first time in 10 years, you're going to be sore as hell. But we have, basically have this analogy with like, that's going to happen. It's not going to be pleasant. I might move around like I'm a lot older than I am for a few days, but that's pretty normal. Same thing up here. When you're working on something, when you're setting boundaries, when you're using I statements, even with your colleagues, I've noticed this about myself, or I've noticed that I've been having a hard time sleeping, or I've noticed that I've been taking work home with me, or I've noticed that I've been multitasking. I'm going to try to work on this. I'm going to try to be more mindful when I'm meeting with someone, or when I'm doing this, or this urgency that I feel with having to respond to an email right away. I'm going to be more aware of this. The modeling, people, the modeling that you're doing, the just what you're expanding and kind of circulating through your culture is golden. All right. What questions do we have? How are we doing? I know this was a lot, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And as you know, as you can probably tell, I could talk about this all day. So if you don't have any, I'll keep going. Just kidding.
Morning.
Good morning.
What family member, parent, grandparent, or family figure was most inspirational to you?
Oh my goodness. Wow. My brain just like cycled through all of them because I feel like the first person that came to mind was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. She was a risk taker. And when my grandparents were older, they had saved some money for them to travel. And my grandfather got to the point where he's like, I don't want to go. My grandmother went to China by herself. She went to Africa by herself. She went all these places by herself. And it wasn't a diss on him, but she was like, I want to do this. And I'm scared. I'm scared to go by myself. But that, to me, just that risk and adventurous side, I think has not only served me well, and I like to think I got a little bit of that from her, but I think that's just something that kind of stays in the back of my mind, of pushing your limits and experiencing new things. Great question.
Hi, good morning. My name's Malcolm.
Hi.
My question is, in environments where sometimes you kind of inherently have a space-eating personality or a space-invading personality, but how do you temper it when your working environment kind of looks at not aggressiveness, but ambition as off-putting, like, trying to claim your space and trying to raise the level of the organization from whatever level you're at.
Okay, so let me paraphrase and see if I heard you correctly. So you're saying sometimes that you're asking if that kind of keeping your head down and that kind of motivation and creating that space can sometimes be seen negatively within an organization? Like, how do you do it? Because they're wanting everyone to be kind of united and collaborative?
Yeah, when trying to lead up in a way.
Trying to lead up, oh, yes. Okay, that could be a whole nother session, right? Yes. Yes, I run into that as well in terms of kind of influencing or kind of leading up. And even a CEO I talked with a few weeks ago, his HR team was so on board, and they were like, Leo, we want you to come in, we want you to do these trainings, we want you to do this. They were gung-ho. And the CEO, I said, well, I need to meet with leadership, because as you know, when you're meeting with leadership too, that's when things are going to happen and stick. And so the CEO said, well, this mental health thing, it's here to stay, right? I said, well, I didn't say it this cheekily, but I said, well, it's kind of always been there because we're human. And yes, it is here to stay. But I think one of the biggest things is, just as I've talked about your kind of the fear, your critic, your pleaser, when you're talking to and you're leading up, I love that how you said that, and you're talking to someone, notice if someone is short, off-putting, defensive, all of these tactics that we have as humans because of our protectors. They are trying to protect something, whether it's change, whether it's more on their plate, and so your goal again is to following those steps and really getting an idea of like what might be behind that. Again, it's not sharing, it's not advice, it's not this. Getting to the bulk and building this collaborative unit with this person, even if very different opinions are there. So it's getting this understanding of like, walk me through that. Or I can tell there's a bit of hesitation there. Is that correct? Like, what are you thinking? Those are wonderful questions, again, to create space, build alliance, so that you're not walking around. Because I know as HR professionals, you're trying very strong efforts to try to maybe get leadership on board with something, to try to change something, and keep getting the stiff arm. And so using that tactic of creating that space and aligning and understanding a bit more, and understanding what your role is, and potentially what the limitations are, even if you don't like them. It's not to just like give up, but understanding all those motivators and intrinsic things and what people are presenting to you and what they're trying to protect is a great way for you to then get more info and I think be more effective. Yeah.
Hi. So similar vein, but what we're trying to implement more emotional intelligence trainings in our corporation as well. What do you say to those who say, oh, this is just fluff? We're here to drive profits.
Ooh, yes. I get that question a lot, right? And so all of this, and it's not just a matter of saying, of course, they want the data and the convincing, but all of this will drive profits. All of this will drive productivity, correct? Because, again, you're not dealing then with staff that is exhausted and that is authentically collaborating. And so when we think about EQ, it's not fluff. It's part of the essence of how we develop and improve as a species. And so it's one of those things where this isn't just like, let's talk about how we feel. No. A lot of times people are put off by the fact that I am a psychotherapist and that they think like, wow, she's just going to come in and diagnose us and do therapy. No, it's very different. It's understanding and helping people, I think, on an individual basis, especially leadership teams, to understand some of their intrinsic workings and why they're doing certain things, what they're modeling without even knowing, and how they're fueling a culture that's either positively affecting everyone and driving sales and productivity and collaboration, massive turnover, or if it's just fueling this urgency and fueling this concept that we have to do all the time, and then we'll burn out and then we'll just hire new people. Something too as HR professionals, and I've been working with a lot of companies on this, and a lot of times people may be like, oh, that's too invasive. But thinking about even during the interview process and in the onboarding process, we're missing the boat when it comes to even putting EQ in those sections, right? We want this culture that's like, we care about people, we're compassionate, we're all this. Great, that's the fluff part. What we gotta get down into is when we hire people, talking about boundaries. Asking them, how do you know when you're stressed? What do you tend to do? What limits do you then set on yourself? Do you have a hard time with setting these boundaries? Do you have a need to please? Do you have this? Tell me about your life. That's a little invasive, but that is essential because that is contagious, my friends, good or bad. And so again, a company that I've been working with recently, they've started to add some of these EQ questions and self-awareness questions within their interview process, within their onboarding process. So this is just culturally what we do. This is how we are setting the precedent that we all need to take care of ourselves and that we all are not walking around with a full balloon.
First of all, this is the class I didn't know that I needed, but I really needed.
Thank you.
I wanted to say I'm at an exciting point in my career. I have worked the entire time, but I stepped away from HR for about a decade and a half to do some work that mattered to me, but primarily I was being a caregiver. And through accidental, joyful providence, I am restarting my career in HR with a hybrid position, also running the office. And I say all of that to tell you this: I am back in school, working full-time, working with HR, managing the facilities, doing a whole bunch of roles at the same time. What questions do I need to keep in mind to make sure that I'm not overextending? Because everything that I'm involved in, I'm passionate about, and I only listed a few of those things. But I think my tendency is to overcommit because I love what I'm doing and then wrestle with being afraid that I'm not going to get it all done well.
Yes. So that last statement that you just said, that is a great indicator that you have already, of course, a level of self-trust, we all do, but increasing that a bit. And so if I had to take a guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, is when you do maybe plan some time for a reset, or recovery, or you do feel that inclination to maybe say, I have enough on my plate at the moment, that pleaser surfaces. Oh, but then we're not going to be able to do this, and then we're going to miss out on this, and then this person doesn't think we're maybe as passionate about this. So thinking and aligning with that part of you that is standing in the way of sometimes that recovery and that go, 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 which is an amazing trait, and I have that as well. I'm sure a lot of us do. It's served you well. But keeping that a bit at bay at certain times so that, again, you have that opportunity to recover. But I think when you do have that internal conflict of like, I probably shouldn't do this because I have X, Y, and Z on my plate, and I love these things, and I love that you're loving everything you're doing, but wondering too, when that internal conflict happenings, take a moment to really engage with that and understand the parts that are like, probably shouldn't do that, but the parts that are overpowering it, and then you kind of find yourself being run down sometimes, even though you're loving what you're doing. So it's identifying those internal conflicts and really collecting the data around that. Great question.